Hey everybody, I'm Alex Debris. Welcome to the DynamoDB workshop. In this workshop, we're going to be learning about the API of DynamoDB, some of the operations you'll use in that API. So if you're looking for data modeling, we're not going to do a lot with data modeling in this workshop. You can go check out other content for that. But if you want to see how to use the DynamoDB API in your application, this is the right place. So welcome to this DynamoDB workshop. This is actually part 2 of the workshop, and it's about the composite primary key and the query operation. And what we're going to be doing here is really learning how to operate on multiple items in single requests using DynamoDB. So I want to review what we're going to cover here, 5 different tasks we're going to work through. Number 1, creating a table using a composite primary key, and we'll learn about composite primary keys, how they differ from simple primary keys, and all of that. Then we'll load some data into our table, and we'll read back multiple specific items using the BatchGetItem operation. So in the last workshop, we used the getItem operation to read a single individual item. Here we'll do multiple specific items using that BatchGetItem request. And then we'll learn about the query operation and some of the flexibility around query, more efficient operation, more flexible operation about how you read multiple items back using that composite primary key structure that we're using in this one. And then finally, we'll clean up, we'll delete our table. Again, this is part of a series of the DynamoDB workshop, which is a 3-part series. The first part is about basic operations, where we created a table, wrote an individual item, read back an individual item, learned about condition expressions, things like that. This is part 2, where we're learning about the composite primary key and that query operation to work on multiple items in a single request. And then finally, part 3 is about handling additional access patterns using secondary indexes. So let's get started. And the first thing we're going to learn about here is the composite primary key. So just a review of what we covered in part 1 of this workshop, we had a DynamoDB table that contained users. And I mentioned that when you create a DynamoDB table, you need to specify what's called a primary key. So I have this over on the left here. Now, every item you write into that table needs to include the primary key. And each item you write in there must be uniquely identified by that primary key. So you won't have 2 items that have the same primary key. So the primary key is going to be very important in DynamoDB. There are 2 types of primary key. First of all, there's the simple primary key, which has just a partition key. That's what we had with our users table, with that username as the primary key. And you can also have what's called a composite primary key, which is made up of 2 elements, a partition key and a sort key. So again, our last example had a table with a simple primary key. Let's look at a table that has a composite primary key, and here's what we have here. This is a movie roles table, so it includes actors and actresses and the various movie roles they've played over the year. You can see on the left there, I have the primary key outlined in red there, and it has 2 different elements, right? The first element outlined in blue is the partition key, and this is the actor name. So I have Tom Hanks, I have Tim Allen, I have Natalie Portman, and then you can see the sort key outlined in green. The second part of that primary key is movie, right? It's gonna be the movie name, Castaway, Toy Story, Black Swan. So with that composite primary key, that primary key has 2 different elements. One thing I want to call out is I mentioned that each item must be uniquely identified by its primary key. So you can't have 2 items with the same primary key. You will notice here you can have multiple items that have the same partition key. So here I have multiple items with Tom Hanks as the partition key. But because those movie values are different, that's okay. And same thing with the movie there. I have multiple items with Toy Story as the sort key. But because their partition keys are different, it's the combination of those 2 elements that need to be unique for that composite primary key. So let's move into our task here, and what we're going to do is start off by creating a table. So I want you to create a DynamoDB table with these conditions. Number 1, a table name of movie roles. We're going to hold our movie role items in this table. Number 2, we're going to have a composite primary key with a hash key of actor and a range key of movie. And then finally, we're going to set up provision throughput with read capacity units and write capacity units of 5. These will both fit within the DynamoDB free tier, so it shouldn't cost you any money to run this workshop. So get started doing that. We'll take a quick break, pause it, work it out, and then we'll run through how to do it in code. All right, welcome back. I hope you were able to create that table with a composite primary key yourself, but just in case you had any issues, we're going to walk through it here. So I have my editor open here. We're in the DynamoDB workshop code from GitHub. Make sure you have that open if you want to see some examples. I'm in the lesson 2, the query operation, and I'm going to open up that source directory, and I have a file called createtable.js. So pop that one open. You can see it's going to be very similar to a lot of what we had in that part 1, that basic operations one, right? At the beginning of every file, I'm going to have this boilerplate where I import the AWS SDK and create a DynamoDB client that'll allow me to run operations. On that DynamoDB client, I'm going to be calling the create table operation. And remember, we had 3 requirements. Number 1, we want to give it a table name of movie roles. I've got that here with that table name attributes. Number 2, we wanted to set up a composite primary key where the hash key is actor and the range key is movie. We're going to do that with our next part here. First of all, let's look at the key schema. That's where you actually declare your hash and range attributes here. So I have this key schema and I have actor declared as hash key, movie declared as range key. Now, everything you use in that key schema also needs to be declared as attribute definitions. So that's what I have up here. I need to declare the names and types of each attribute I use in my primary key. So I have that declared. Actor is going to be a string. Movie is also going to be a string. Got that all there. Finally, last thing we need to do is just declare our provision throughput, which we have here. Again, going to fit within the AWS free tier there. So let's pop down into my terminal and make sure that this works. I'm going to run node source create table.js and run that. And you can see that my table was created successfully. So now I have my DynamoDB table. It has that composite primary key of actor for the partition key, movie for the sort key. Let's get into some operations and load some data into it. And the first couple of tasks here are going to be about loading items into and reading items from your DynamoDB table. Let's get started by loading some items into your DynamoDB table. In part 1 of this DynamoDB workshop, we learned about the put item operation, right? Where you can insert an individual item into your DynamoDB table. You can also use things like condition expressions to conditionally insert those items into your table. Say, only if this item doesn't already exist or something like that. So you could use that here, but what if you have a lot of items you want to insert into your table? You have 10 different items that you want to put in. You could fire off 10 separate put item requests, or you could use the BatchWriteItem operation. What this allows you to do is insert multiple items in a single request. So rather than having 10 separate put item requests, you can do one BatchWriteItem operation, insert those all at the same time. One thing that's unique about this is that those individual items will succeed or fail independently. So again, if you're writing 10 items into your table, it's possible that 2 of them will fail, and that response will come back to you and say, hey, here are the items that failed. You can assume that everything else succeeded, and you can handle those ones that failed as you need to. Now, if you need those items to succeed or fail together, those are a batch that succeeds or fail together, then you need some transactionality. You can use the transact write item operation, which we won't cover in this workshop, but is also very useful for a lot of access patterns. The last thing I want to say about BatchWriteItem is it has limited functionality compared to its individual item operation. So if you're manipulating items in DynamoDB, there are basically 3 things you can do. You can do put item to insert an item, you can do update item to update an existing item, or you can do delete item to remove an item from your table. Using BatchWriteItem, you can use 2 of those operations. You can use put item or delete item, but you can't use update item as part of the BatchWriteItem operation. Also, you can't add conditions onto these write requests. So, we saw with that put item operation, if you don't want to override existing items, you can add conditions on them. You can't use conditions as part of a BatchWriteItem request, which is kind of a downside and a bummer. So if those 10 items you want to write all need to have conditions on them, you'll need to fire those off as 10 separate requests. So, but other than that, if your needs fit within there, BatchWriteItem can be really useful. So let's hop into our task. I want you to sort of look at the documentation around how BatchWriteItem works and use it here. So your task is going to be insert 4 movie role records into your DynamoDB table using BatchWriteItem. If you look in the repo I have there, I have some items in a file called items.json in this second lesson folder. So use that if you want some items to write in there, but take some time, figure out how to do that. I'll pause this as you need to, and we'll come back and see how to do it. All right, welcome back. Hope you had good luck with the BatchWriteItem documentation. Let's take a look at how I did it, and walk through some of the code there. So if you go check out the repo, number 1, remember that I have this items.json that just includes some of those movie roles. So the examples I had in my table, those are put out here. They're in DynamoDB object syntax. You can see here each value is going to have the type with it as well. So all formatted for you there. So I have a file in the source directory called insertitems.js. Pop that one open and let's see what we have here. Again, at the beginning, importing that AWS SDK, creating that client, and then we're just loading up those items from that items.json file, a little boilerplate there. So then what we do is I just made a little variable called request where I map over those items and create a little object that says put request. That's indicating to this batch write item that I'm doing a put request. Remember, I can do puts or I can do deletes. Here I'm going to do put request and saying, hey, here's my item, and I'm just putting that role in there. And then I go down, I call batch write item, and it's going to have a request items property. I put those in there. It asks what table it's going into, so it's my movie roles table, and then I'm just passing in all those requests that I created up there. And then it's going to run, print those out for me. So let's see what it looks like to do some of this. I'm going to do node source insert items.js. And you can see that my movie role items were created successfully. So what I did there is I inserted 4 different items into my table in a single request rather than doing 4 separate put item requests, which is a huge benefit. So let's go see how to read those items out of our table now. So let's read these items back. In part 1 of this workshop, we looked at that get item operation to read an individual item back from DynamoDB. Here we're going to use the BatchGetItem operation, and just like there's a BatchWriteItem to write multiple items in a single request, BatchGetItem allows you to do multiple get item requests in a single request. So if you have multiple items you want to retrieve, you can bundle that up into a single request using that BatchGetItem. The important thing you need to know here is you need to have the full primary key of each item. So in part 1, that was a simple primary key. It just had that partition key. But in this case, we need to include both elements of that primary key, both the partition key and the sort key. So make sure you include that with that BatchGetItem request. Let's move right into our task here. And the task can be pretty straightforward. We wrote those 4 items into our table. Let's read those movie role items from our table using that BatchGetItem request. So pause the video, take some time, look at the documentation, and we'll come back and see how to do it. All right, welcome back. Hope you were able to use that BatchGetItem request to read those items back. In case you had any trouble, let's just walk through what that looks like, how I did it here. So go to the code here. I'm gonna go to the source directory and I have a file called getroles.js. Let's pop that one open here. Again, got the boilerplate of importing the AWS SDK and creating that client. And then on that client, going to use that BatchGetItem operation. The parameters are going to pass in here. Again, it's very similar to the BatchWriteItem where you have request items, which is going to be an object, and you say which table you want to operate on. So it's going to be movie roles. That's the name of the table that we created here. And then I just need to say the keys that I want to get back. And I'm going to pass in an array with all these different keys. And I have the different Tom Hanks movies. I have Tim Allen. I have Natalie Portman. So it's going to get all those back for me. So again, I need to specify the entire primary key when I'm using get item, and that includes BatchGetItem here. So let's run this and just see what it looks like here. So I have node running that get roles file, and it's just going to print it all out. And it's a lot of syntax there, but you can see I retrieved all the different items from my table there and was able to get that back. So that's what it looks like to use BatchGetItem. In the next step, we're going to look at the query operation to read multiple items back and see how that's a little bit different. So let's learn about this query operation, which is my favorite operation in DynamoDB because it gives you a lot of power, a lot of flexibility, while still remaining a very efficient operation that you can use a lot in your application. So to see why that's useful, let's go back to our table that we have here with our 4 different items in it. And we just saw using BatchGetItem how we can retrieve multiple items in a single request, right? So if I want to get Tom Hanks in Castaway and Tom Hanks in Toy Story in a single request, I can do that with BatchGetItem. The problem here is I need to know that full primary key for all those items, right? So if I'm getting Tom Hanks's movies, I need to know the name of his movies to get those items. And it's unlikely that I'm going to know all those, every single time. It's more likely that I'm going to say, hey, give me all of Tom Hanks's movies, regardless of sort of what the movie name is. And then I can show those to the user. So that's what the query operation allows you to do. Again, you can read multiple items in a single request just like you could do with BatchGetItem, but the key here is that it only requires the partition key. It's only going to require the actor name without requiring the movie name as well. So that gives us a lot of power and flexibility around that. You can also include conditions on the sort key if you want to. So for our example, I have to say, give me the movies for Tom Hanks or for Tim Allen or someone else, but I can also include conditions on that sort key. So I could say, give me all the movies or all the roles where the movie title is greater than F, right? And so for Tom Hanks, it's going to filter out Castaway, but it's going to give me back Toy Story back. So I can include conditions on the sort key. We're going to have a task showing how to use query, but before we do that, I want to talk about something called expression attribute names and values, because you're going to see these in DynamoDB expressions, whether it's condition expressions, update expressions, or as we're going to do here, key condition expressions, and they can kind of throw you off if you're not sure what you're doing. So I'm going to show that with an example. This is going to be different than our actor and movie roles example because I don't want to give away the answers for the task that you're going to do. So imagine you have an IoT application where you're storing readings from particular devices, and your structure is the partition key is device ID, and the sort key is going to be timestamp of the particular reading. So what you could do here is you might have a query that looks something like this, and you're required to have what's called a key condition expression, and that's just saying to query, hey, these are the items that I want to get, right? This is the partition key I want to hit, and here are the conditions on the sort key if I want to have those. So look at that key condition expression. We'll get into the funky syntax here in a second, but I want to point out a couple things first. Number one, notice how I have an exact match on that partition key. So I'm using the equal sign and saying the partition key has to equal this particular value. I can also have conditions on that sort key if I want to here. So here I'm saying, hey, the timestamp has to be greater than this particular timestamp. And you can use things like greater than, less than, between if you want to get a range of items. Basically anything you could do on a dictionary or phone book you can use here. So now let's look more at the specific syntax of that key condition expression. You'll notice a few of these values have hashtags in front of them. So hashtag device ID, later on hashtag timestamp. What does that mean? Well, anytime I'm referring to an attribute name on my items, I can use this hashtag syntax, and it's going to substitute it down in this expression attribute names map that I'm also passing along. And what this is doing is just substituting it out. So hashtag device ID matches hashtag device ID down below, and it's saying, okay, use the device ID as sort of capitalized there for that expression. It's going to substitute that value in. Same thing with timestamp. You can see that over there, substituting that in. You also see some values that have colons in front of them. So I have colon device ID, colon timestamp. Those are going to match up down here to what are called expression attribute values. And anytime I'm referring to an attribute value or setting an attribute value in a update expression, something like that, I need to substitute these out. These are going to start with colons, and you can see them down there. And the reason we're doing that is remember that DynamoDB object syntax, right? Where any attribute value you pass in, you have to specify the type of it as well. So, here it's a number, below it's a string. You can also have maps or lists or things like that. And that could be hard to include in a string expression, right? Where you have this complicated, all these brackets everywhere, lots of different quotes and quote escaping, different things like that. That can be difficult to do. So what they'll do is they'll make you sort of substitute that out in your expression down into that expression attribute values, where you can use an actual object rather than sort of this stringified version of it. So that's how expression works. Two rules you need to know about expression attribute names and values. Number one, you have to use expression attribute values. So you have to substitute anytime you're using an attribute value in your expression. You need to sort of substitute it out into expression attribute values. With expression attribute names, you may use expression attribute names, that separate map, or you can refer to the attribute name directly in your expression. So I didn't need to do device ID sort of separately in that expression attribute names. I could have just done it in the expression itself. However, DynamoDB has a big list of reserved words. I think it's like over 400 of them, and they include common words like timestamp or date or bucket, things that you might use as keys in your table. So anytime you're using those attributes in your expression, if it's a reserved word, then you have to use expression attribute names. So in this case, my general rule is just always use expression attribute names. It's just going to save you time of whether you need to go look up whether it's a reserved word, things like that. It can save you a lot of time that way. So that's how expression attribute names and values work. It's going to be a little tricky. You'll take some practice to get used to it, but then you'll sort of figure it out. So let's move into our task here. We're going to use that query operation, and I want you to read all the movie roles for a particular actor using that query operation, right? So we wrote roles for Tom Hanks, for Tim Allen, for Natalie Portman. Pick one of those, write out the query expression to fetch all the movie roles for that actor. Take some time, pause it here, and we'll come back and see how I did it. All right, welcome back. Hope you had good luck with that query operation and working out the expression attribute names and values. Let's take a look at how I did that. So go to the source directory, and I have this queryroles.js file. So pop that one open. You can see here, again, I've got that boilerplate at the beginning of just importing that AWS SDK, creating that DynamoDB client. And then on that client, I'm going to run the query operation. And a couple things I need to pass in there. Number one, table name. What's the table you're going to query on? Number two is going to be key condition expression. That's the most important part of that query operation. And again, you need to specify an exact match on that partition key. You can also specify sort key conditions if you want to. So that's where you're going to specify in that key condition expression. Here, I'm just doing that exact match on that partition key. I'm saying, hey, actor equals actor, right? And for those expression attribute values, I'm substituting in from down here, and I'm saying, hey, I want to match on Tom Hanks. Again, this is an example where I didn't substitute out the expression attribute names. So you don't have to do that. Actor is not a reserved word, so I don't have to do that. Just wanted to give you a flavor for what that looks like. Again, I recommend in most cases just actually substituting that out, but it's up to you. So let's just run this and see what it looks like here. Node query roles. And you can see I retrieved multiple items back. It says it found 2 roles for Tom Hanks. I got Castaway, and I've got Toy Story as well. And the nice thing is here, I can go and I can switch this out and I can say, hey, give me Tim Allen instead. Let's save that and see what we have here. This one, Tim Allen, only has 1 role, so I found 1 role. And that's Toy Story, for Buzz Lightyear. So that's how that query operation works. And again, very flexible because it allows you to say, fetch many where, I know the sort of parent thing and I want to get all the related items for it. So whether that's the roles for a movie actor, whether that's, the readings for an IoT device timestamp, whether that's the orders for a customer, you can use query operation to handle these different things. All right, we've learned the key points we want to hit here. Now we're just going to clean up. We're going to delete our DynamoDB table. So very simple task here is going to be delete the movie roles that you created, similar to what we did in lesson 1 of this workshop. So take a few seconds, pause this, and let's delete the table. All right, welcome back. Hope we were able to delete that table. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So in that source directory, we have deletetable.js. We'll open that one up and pretty simple here. We're just gonna, on our DynamoDB client, we'll call that delete table operation and pass in the table name that we want to delete. So I'll just run that real quick to get rid of our table. And you can see the table was deleted successfully. So we've cleaned up here. We're not gonna be incurring additional charges or using up our free tier or anything like that. All right, that concludes lesson 2 of this DynamoDB workshop. I hope it was helpful for you. We learned how to work with multiple items in DynamoDB, whether that's with BatchWriteItem, BatchGetItem, or that really powerful query operation that lets you retrieve multiple items in a single request. Be sure to check out lesson 3 in this workshop where we see how to handle additional access patterns using secondary indexes. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more DynamoDB, AWS, serverless content. Check out the DynamoDB book if you want to learn how to do data modeling in DynamoDB. Other than that, until next time, thank you.